We have four panelists that will answer questions according to who's responsible for that area, who has more knowledge. We have Glenn, who's been with us before, Glenn Gebhardt. He did a lecture on Cuba. He's an Emmy Award film and video producer and director. He lives in Long Island, but teaches at Loyola Marymount, and he was the director for this film. So I'm going to introduce Glenn, and Glenn is going to take it from there. And thank you, Glenn, for being with us.
Yes, hello. I had some faces I recognize from the last time. Thank you for coming back. I'm Glenn Gebhardt. I'm a professor and chair of the production department at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. This film, A Farm Picture, was produced a while back. I mean, I looked at the date, it's 17 years old, which I was surprised. Time goes by. So I brought in some panelists because some things are the same, some things may have changed, and we have two panelists especially that can answer some of the issues. But I'd like to. You have bios in the email that was sent to you, so I'm going to just briefly introduce the panelists. Mario Congreve he works at Cal State Dominguez Hills in Los Angeles, where he's calling from. And he and I have made films together for many, many years. And he is co-producer and director of photography for the film. Richard Wines lives on the East End. And Richard Wines is really interesting. He's I would call a cultural preservationist. Really active on the East End, and he's an author. He's actually in the midst of writing a book about, it was the Halleck family, right, Richard?
That is correct.
Yeah. So he certainly can help us get up to date with some of the issues of the film that are now in the film 17 years old. And Frank Toronto is an adjunct professor at Stony Brook University, who was our advisor for the film in dealing with issues that we were going to film, and helped us as the line producer getting places, people, etc. So I'm just going to do a quick intro of the film. We won't take long for that. I'm going to show you a 5-minute clip that deals with 3 issues, and I'll explain that in a minute. But before I do, I'd like to hand this off to Mario, who will talk a little bit about the making of the film, and feel free to chime in, Frank, if you'd like to. So Mario, you may want to share your screen with the people.
Okay. Let me try here. And all right, this is some production photographs from the film I was able to find. First of all, is the poster I made for the film. It's basically a Long Island map with the progress in the area of the Queens and going into the farms towards the east. And it was done kind of in the looks of a old poster for fruit or farms. Then the film, I found this thing, a program schedule WLIW 21 for Tuesday, April 13 of 2010. I think this is the second time Glenn and Frank showed up there, but that's the only thing I was able to find. 8 p.m. the film was shown there. I know it was done somewhere earlier on too. Here's some production photographs. We started with old machinery, and you can see my tripod there at the end. And I tried to capture the farm equipment from the early years, and that was part of the beginning of the film, showing this kind of gone by era in types of photographs. The camera we used was a GL1 mini DV digital camera. This is kind of like the state of the art for that time. It was still 4x3, and but it was digital rather than analog. So we shot with 2 cameras like that, and that's how the picture got done. On location, here we are with Glenn shooting some of those old farm machinery. We shot all over the place, from Queens all the way to Orient. Here's a big, and we were on the North Shore and the South Shore. What makes the place iconic? We shot a lot of these homes, farm homes, and the weather and the place itself. A lot of nostalgic views of homes dilapidated in a gone by era. This was in Bridgehampton, where we shot that White House, and this was the house of Dick Hendrickson of Bridgehampton, and it deals with nostalgia there. We keep going to that. Same thing here is this dilapidated kind of structures where the paint is kind of peeling off. And so we did a study on farm buildings. Then we did a character portrait, family history of Terry Farms, and we did some of the environment. There's Glenn shooting a scene in the field. Also, we went to some of the educational people at Cornell Educational. We did some interviews with Bill Sanok. And we did some recreations of interior lighting design, kind of like kind of Dutch masters type lighting. We did the interviews with very precarious instruments of Joe Gergela here at the Long Island Farm Bureau, and we're trying to white balance the indoor and outdoor thing. It's kind of interesting, and the stand is on top of the table. We also have a color palette, like in William Sidney Mount. There were a lot of paintings in the film that reflect that. Here we're looking through a barn window, and this is the end. Also, an idea of William Sidney Mount color palette, and the titles roll over that slide or film. Then we went over to see Mary Cooper, and this was there was a house in the front, and the backyard was a cemetery, and the house was inhabited by Chilean people, and I'm from Chile. That was kind of weird. Also, we went into Malvern, Grossman Farms, and we got some interviews with Liz Grossman. Recreation, some poetry. We had some poetries being recited and trying to help people understand what the place looked like. And we went to Aqueduct, New York, boutique wineries. We shot some of that stuff. Also, we went to a place called Mattituck, New York. We did a lot of B-roll there. We got a picture with Robert Gaffney here, County Executive, Suffolk County, New York. We did some interviews, and that's how the setup looked like. Again, there's the GL1 camera, very, very primitive lighting, but that's what it was. Then we did a whole bunch of Schmidt Farms and interviews on the field. There's Glenn doing an interview with the head of the farm. And I'm working there doing some B-roll. Here also part of the Schmidt farm, people gathering and packing stuff. We brought a jib arm, and we're constantly moving the jib arm and doing some shots with the jib arm. It was brand new at the time, and this is a crew of 2. So then a lot of handheld shots. Glenn did a whole bunch of following people and having some interviews done with people as they moved around. A lot of landscapes. We did landscapes up in Orient. Landscape there. And these are pictures that I took when we were on location. Some, I think, were taken by Frank also. Here, ready for the market shipment. This place, we shot somewhere across that place in Setauket. And at the end, we have a film opening at the Long Island Museum of Carriage. There's a reception, and Frank is letting people in. And that's the end of the presentation.
So essentially, when we shot the film, I shot people. I didn't shoot people, I videoed people. And Mario did beauty shots and establishers. Frank, do you have anything to say about the making of the film before we move on?
Yeah, I essentially I wrote the film, and as line producer, it was my task to locate people for each of the characters that we interviewed in the film. I spent, in some cases, a whole day interviewing people to find out their orientation and how they could contribute to the film. At which point I wrote a series of questions that Glenn would use in the interview for the individuals. Some of the individuals are still with us. Unfortunately, several have passed on. Richard Hendrickson passed on at over 100. Lyle Wells is gone. The Grossman farm in Malvern is no longer functioning. And most of the rest of the folks in the farms in the film, at least, are still operating. The Schmidts, when we filmed them, were not heavily involved in local farm stand, but since that time, they have developed a pretty extensive local farm stand operation. Richard, you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, that's very much the case. Lyle Wells, of course, died tragically in an accident on his farm 2 years ago. He was trying to unclog a manure spreader that had frozen in the middle of the winter. But two of his children are still carrying on the farming operation.
Glenn, there's a question, I'm sorry. Someone wanted to know, where was the reconstructed Native American village?
Reconstructive Native Village was actually up in Connecticut, in Washington, Connecticut. That was the best reconstruction that I knew of, so we filmed there.
Yeah.
And there was a question from Mario. What is a B-roll?
B-roll, yeah. B-roll is when somebody's talking, you want to show just the face and who's talking, and then you want to go to what we call B-roll, meaning we're getting off the talking head and we're going into images that exemplify what the person is talking about.
So we can continue with questions after. I think a majority of this talk panel will be answering your questions. But let's finish with, I'd like to just go into the issues that the film brings up. And I chose 3 issues. One is the legacy of farming. The next is inexpensive or old crops like potatoes on very expensive land, grown on expensive land. And the third is land preservation. And I have a 5-minute video. I'm going to share the screen, show you the video, and then we can, you can ask any questions you want. So let me just share the screen and we'll do that. Okay.
When I think back of the farmland that my grandfather farmed and my father after my grandfather, and now I've farmed this, I have like a sense of, I really want to hold on to the land. I don't want to see it. I know they never wanted to see it developed, or they would have developed it. They hung on to it so they could give it to somebody else, turn it down in the family. I feel the same way. I would like to, when my time comes to give up, I'd like to be able to turn a good portion of this property over to my family and let it stay the way it is. I know they came over here in the late 1600s. This particular farm has been in the Terry family ever since. This is the Terry family cemetery. It was started sometime back in the early 1700s, and
Janine,
all the Terry family is buried here.
I can't talk. I have to call.
Particular Terry farm. The Terry farm goes all the way back to the bay on this side and goes all the way to the sound on this side. Some of the real old ones, like I said, were buried in the 1700s. It's nice to know that I'm part of a generation that goes on and goes on and goes on. And I'd like to hold on to that generation. You know, I like not to be the one to have to stop it.
What was life like when I was a kid? It was great. Right. We had lots of friends, and basically it looked exactly the same. And it hasn't changed. The bonds were here. My father liked the business the same as I do. But that was basically the way things were around here.
It's winter now. We're at the end of our shipping season, hopefully, and the barn that we're going in is the tail end of the crop, about 30 tractor trailer loads. Marilee Foster is my name. We have a family farm in Sagaponack, Long Island. We're out on the East End. I got to be a farmer. My father's a farmer. So that my brother and I, fifth generation. Our family's had land here since the late 1700s. We're the last potato farm in Sagaponack, an evaporating class, I suppose. We're growing an inexpensive food on expensive ground. And if there's any idea of things equalizing out there, like in the greater realm, the idea is that potatoes are very affordable. Anybody can walk into a supermarket. You can live on them if you need to. And so you're kind of taking care of a diverse swath of the population. It's a responsibility. I mean, I think if I fail at this, I've failed every person that ever worked for it. So I've failed, my father and his father and, the generations that have kind of come together to make, you never know if you're at the end of something, I guess. And certainly here with a lot of farms over the past 20 years going the other way, that's always there's an apprehension.
The importance of preserving the actual farmland itself in the industry is the fact that it has become almost an endangered species, where it was taken for granted before. You drive out to the East End and all you saw was farmland. It was considered a very rural area. Well, now that's being seen as endangered. Most people here on Long Island are maybe 1, 2, 3 generations away from the farm themselves. And it gives them the opportunity to say, oh yeah, I remember going to Grandpa's farm and milking a cow or, taking a hayride and they can come back and it all floods back into their mind. When this is gone out here, that opportunity doesn't exist anymore. They're going to have to go to, I don't know, somewhere quite a bit further than an hour and a half drive out of Queens.
One of the things about Suffolk County that makes it so unique, we're in touch with our future without ever letting go of the past. We still see ourselves as farmers, as fishermen, not just as biotechnicians and not just as engineers, but this is part of the cultural and part of the historical development of the county. It needs to be preserved. If we don't do that, we wind up with a rather sterile environment.
Okay, we're back, and I guess I'll let Elizabeth take over here for questions.
Thanks, Glenn. So we do have some questions here. I asked about the B-roll. Did you touch base with the Krupskis?
I'm not quite sure what the question is, but I do see the Krupskis every once in a while. Al Krupski, of course, is now the county legislator for the east end of Long Island. And the farm is going strong.
John, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it was just one of our favorite farms out there. We used to know the family fairly well. I think the husband passed away. I'm not sure if the wife is still alive.
I believe the two parents did pass away.
Okay. Next question, Charlotte. What happened to the Grossman farm? I used to live close in West Hempstead and went there all the time, especially at the holidays.
Frank, you're
Frank, you're muted.
muted, Frank.
Frank. You're muted.
The Grossman farm is no longer operating, and I believe it's gone over to housing development.
Charlotte, did that answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay. We have Irma. How do you feel about the breweries? Anyone?
What was that?
Yeah.
Could you repeat it?
How do you feel about the breweries?
The breweries have created a mini boom. There's a lot of hops being grown all along the north shore of the island, and it's another crop that has the potential to be very profitable, and it's probably replacing some of the potato crop that we used to grow.
I would take a very different perspective on that, Frank.
Okay.
I see these breweries, and there's one operating right next to my brother's farm. I see them as exploiting, pretending to be farming when they're really not. They grow very little. They grow hardly any of their barley. They're basically just tourist operations and have nothing to do with farming, unlike a lot of the wineries.
Okay, I can.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Frank. Go ahead, Frank. Did you have something?
No, it's they're very conspicuous. The hops growing, and it's a. I don't know how long it's going to last, but there seems to be a super abundance of local beers.
If I could interject a little here, something that I have noticed is in the old days, it was potatoes and carrots and whatever. And then came in of the vineyards, which in a sense saved some of the land from my point of view. So these crops that are coming in, whether it's whatever, the vineyards, et cetera, I see as, and Richard, perhaps you could respond to this, are in a sense preserving the land or preserving open space.
Definitely the vineyards have helped in that. Probably not even quite half of the vineyard land is actually preserved for the long term. So it's hard to know if that's a permanent solution or not. But the other thing that's been happening a lot, of course, is that potato farming is clearly continued to go down, but we're getting more and more of is highly specialized farms and smaller farms, ones that are growing things like mushrooms or snails or my nephew now sells raw milk, for instance, just something no one was doing when Glenn did the film, but he can sell it directly to the customer. So there's a lot of specialized farming and marketing directly to the customer. And I see that as really the move. It's probably going to preserve agriculture here on the East End.
The antecedent of the the specialization that Richard's speaking of was cauliflower. That was a Long Island North Fork specialty, and it was big money crop. But again, with the reduction in land dedicated to it, it's lost some of its market value.
Well, cauliflower was an interesting crop. Potatoes were an expensive crop to grow, but farmers could make a lot of money in a good year. And I know my uncle told me that you'd have one good year out of 10 and 2 or 3 okay years in there, and then a whole bunch of years and weren't very good and a disaster or two. Cauliflower cost almost nothing to plant. Seeds were very cheap. And so it was something that farmers could plant, harvest in a different time of the year than their potatoes. And if they did well, they made some money, but if they didn't do well, they didn't lose anything either. But cauliflower as a commercial crop has virtually disappeared. It's can't be grown here profitably anymore. It's only grown for the local market on the farm stands and things like that.
Yeah, we still grow the best cauliflower in the world on the North Fork.
I'll agree with that.
All right, we have another question. Some of it might have been answered. What crops are most productive in terms of revenue? Is the conversion of farms to wineries a good thing?
It's hard to know how profitable a lot of the wineries are. Some of them are hobby wineries, others are quite serious and seem to be doing okay financially. Probably some of the most productive crops are sod, nursery, definitely greenhouse production is probably the most productive per acre. And there's a lot of large-scale greenhouse production here now.
Probably from an individual farmer's standpoint, the most profitable thing they can do is operate a farm stand and put out a variety of locally produced products. And that can be quite lucrative for the local farmer.
Okay, Sue asks a question. Has the Peconic Bay land preservation tax made a difference?
Yes, that's made a huge difference. I've been very active in farmland preservation as a member of Riverhead's Farmland Preservation Committee, and my wife is the past president of the Peconic Land Trust, which doesn't get that tax, but facilitates the development, the preservation process. I think here in Riverhead, which is where the predominance of the remaining farmland is in Suffolk County, about half of the farmland has already been preserved, and probably 2/3 of that has been preserved either from, there's a 1/4% county sales tax, which the county gets and is used to preserve a lot of land. And then the 2% tax has been used to preserve, that goes to the towns. And I know in Riverhead, we actually spent all the money that came in and then we borrowed against all the future revenues. So we actually have nothing left to spend right now, but it's been very helpful.
One of the things where in the film, Lyle Wells mentioned going to Washington, and Hillary Clinton talked about federal involvement in farmland preservation. And one of the things that Bill Sanek said was they were trying to preserve 20,000 acres of farmland, which I believe we may have exceeded by now. But the point was that when the Long Island delegation approached the House of Representatives Agricultural Committee, the representative from Texas looked at him and said, "You're trying to preserve 20,000 acres. That's just one good farm here in Texas." So we can't really look toward the federal government for very much support in farmland preservation.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from Diana. Can you tell us the history of the land that is now the Queen's Farm Museum?
Don't know. I don't know.
Richard?
I'm not familiar with that either. I know about it, but I've never been.
Glenn, are you?
Let me just say one other thing though. As an historian, Queens was the leading agricultural county in the country in the mid-19th century.
Wow.
No, I don't know about that. I know about the Halleckville Museum, which actually Richard can speak about. Richard, would you like to tell them about the Halleckville Farm Museum?
Well, let me, for those of you who have not been to the Halleckville Museum, Sound Avenue in Riverhead, what I like to say about it is it's just the way that particular museum is like all of Long Island once was. Series of old farmhouses, old barns, and you look out and behind it is all of the preserved farmland, real agriculture taking place. So it's probably the only place you can go anymore and see what all of Long Island looked like 100 years ago, 150 years ago.
There's really, when we talk about farmland preservation, there's another issue that is kind of underlying. And the problem is that as we preserve these farms, we need to have a critical mass of farmers and operating farms to supply the collateral kinds of enterprises and businesses that they need. And for example, one of the things that the Fosters are forced to do is they can't buy farm equipment here on Long Island. They have to go down to Pennsylvania to the major farm areas there. And as the number of operating farms dwindles, it becomes even more critical to try to preserve a critical mass of farmers that can demand the kinds of services that they need.
Yes, my nephew 2 weeks ago had to go to Pennsylvania because he needed a four-wheel drive tractor, and he was able to find a 20-year-old one that only cost him $40,000.
Wow. Wow. Okay, Joan asked the question, where do you sell most of your produce? I don't know. Joan?
King
Let-
Color.
No, actually, I would say most of the produce now, if you think about all of the farm stands, all of the retail, an awful lot of it is being sold locally. The wineries epitomize that particular thing that Long Island wine would probably not be competitive. People couldn't go straight to the vineyards and buy the wine, and with the winery getting the full price rather than just the wholesale price. But there are still crops that are definitely wholesale. Certainly the nursery crops are that way. Certainly the sod crops are that way. And there are still farmers. The Mary Lee is still producing some potatoes, and there are other potato farmers that have, there are some specialized farmers that have still managed to operate in the wholesale environment, but it's not easy from the east end of Long Island, not with the expensive land, as Glenn has pointed out.
One of the side advantages of the wineries is drawing people out to the East End, which then, facilitates local farm stand sales.
I would think that would be the same for the breweries, but Richard might know better. Just bringing people out.
It does bring people out. Depends on what you see as their goal. But just to take my brother again as an example, they sell everything that they grow from basically the back door of the house. People come to the yard, buy their milk, buy their eggs, buy their vegetables. He sells nothing on the wholesale market.
Frank, could you expand on this whole idea of nurseries and their history on Long Island? Because you told me once that nurseries were going back to the colonial days on Long Island.
Yeah, as Richard mentioned, Queens was a huge agricultural county, and the nursery business on Long Island goes back before the Revolutionary War. Prince's Nursery in Flushing was the largest
right?
Nursery in the colonies. And one of the stories is that the British got in there right after right after the Battle of Long Island and cut down 30,000 grafted cherry trees for tent poles. So they were enormous. And so was Bloodgood's nursery and Parsons, that whole area. And so the nursery business has a very long and deep history. Orchid growing for the New York market was basically carried on in Long Island, on Long Island in Westbury, and then down in Bellport. And so,
and we still have a large scale orchid grower here in Riverhead.
right. And so it has a long history.
The nursery growers here on the East End are kind of interesting because most of them happened in the last 40, 50 years or so. And many of them were Italian families that came over, became landscapers on estates and things like that, were in the landscape business, and then integrated vertically into buying land out here in the East End and starting a nursery. So there's an interesting cultural heritage to the business.
Another piece of that is if we look back at the middle of the 19th century, when the big Irish immigration was taking place, the exodus from Ireland, the last thing that the Irish wanted to do was to get involved in potatoes. And so they migrated into the city and became the policemen and firemen. But in the 1870s, Poland was broken up between Russia, Prussia, and Austria, and the peasants were driven out, and they wound up coming here and were in a position to initially work on local farms and then purchase the local farms. And their arrival was just before the potato became a huge crop. And so Riverhead became famous Polish country for potato growing.
One of the things that we interpret at the Halleckville Museum is that in that neighborhood, 70% of the farms were owned by Polish immigrant families by 1930. And I interviewed some of those farmers and then descendants of them and asked them what the main crop was back in the area of Poland they came from. And of course, it was potatoes. So they came here with potatoes in their blood, and certainly that worked well for them here.
Okay, I'm gonna get through some of these questions. We have almost 20 questions in the chat. So during the autumn, the East End has become a visitor destination for kids and families. Harbs is a perfect example. How do you feel about the commercialism that has developed?
Well,
Frank,
as a resident here in the East End, we have very mixed feelings about it. You can't get out onto the road on a weekend because it's so stuffed with cars. But Ed Harbs is also a good friend, and he and others have certainly made a good living. And the agritourism has been an important part of preservation of farming here in the East End.
One of the things to look at is the plight of Baymen in East Hampton. The land values there have skyrocketed so high that the old time Baymen can't afford to live there, and essentially are being squeezed out. So it's almost inevitable that land prices are going to significantly impact the profile of the population out on the East End.
Okay, has the amount of farmland continued to decrease? In 2003, I thought the film mentioned 5,000 acres. What is it now?
Can you answer that, Richard?
Well, that's certainly not the correct number for 2000. Farmland hasn't decreased that much in the time since the film was done. A lot of the sales of farmland have been for preservation purposes. I don't know the exact number of acres left. There's about, I think there's close to 20,000 acres here in Riverhead alone.
Okay, what percentage of these farms are organic?
A very small percentage are totally organic, but it is another niche market that as demand for organic farming, organic produce, there are a number of direct to retail farmers who do practice organic practices. I think only one vineyard is totally organic, for instance.
Mhm. What different crops that you would like to see grown to replace potatoes?
Wow.
Well, the one I find most interesting is watching the vast increase in growing vegetables for direct sale to customers. When I grew up, we looked out the back door of our house and it was potatoes as far as you could see in every direction. Beautiful in the late spring when they were all blossoming, but and there was an occasional farmer growing other stuff you could eat. But now a lot of the farms are growing a huge variety of, I have to say, really good vegetables.
Is migrant labor used and how do you get the laborers?
That is an excellent question, and it's actually, Glenn, I hate to say this, but it may be an oversight in the movie that you show a few pictures with migrant laborers, but you never talk about that issue. And labor has been the dirty underside of farming since the 17th century, when slavery was very common in this area and a lot of farm workers were slaves. Moving up to the early 20th century and the Great Migration and migrant workers coming up from Virginia and other places in the South and living under terrible conditions. Now we have a lot of Hispanic workers. Conditions have improved somewhat for them, but it's still, it is the underside of farming and something that we should acknowledge. But as Lyle would say, did say to me, you can't farm without labor. And so the problem right now, especially with current restrictions on travel and over the last 4 years, the restrictions that have put on immigration, it's been very difficult for farmers, and they're having to move away from some of the more labor-intensive crops, which of course are the vegetables everyone likes to eat, and grow things that are maybe can be machine harvested because of the problem of not having enough migrant or immigrant labor coming from south of the border.
What about livestock farming? Someone asked.
We're getting more of that. I mean, even my family's farm, it was my entire lifetime, it was mostly vegetables, and now it's entirely dedicated to a 25 herd dairy operation and my brother's 1,000 chickens. So, and there are a number of other specialized operations, 4 hands, 8 hands, for instance, that are growing beef. And again, it's only possible because they can sell directly to the customer. And I have to say, often they charge fairly high prices. And I hope all of you listening here are going to be willing to pay those prices, because that's what keeps farming going on the East End, is being able to charge reasonable prices for really fresh produce.
How much has local restaurants' use of local crops helped the farmers?
It's certainly important. Just to think in terms of the one remaining duck farm here, the Crescent Duck Farm in Acklebog, basically their whole market is restaurants, although not just local. You go to Colorado and you'll find Crescent Duck on the menu. But yes, it's been very important.
Okay, Cynthia asked, for farm preservation, there is the Suffolk County purchase of ag rights that has been used extensively since 1960s, I believe, and then the Peconic Land Trust, which has several farms in fee that are demonstration and educational, as well as quite a few conservation easement for ag preservation in perpetuity. Though PLT is concerned with some of these preserved lands to estates that no longer farm it, they do have a program to ensure that agriculture, sorry, continues on the land with conservation easements. Our thoughts on these programs?
Well, the Land Trust has their Farmers for the Future program, where what they're doing is bringing in people who think they like to get into farming. And they give them a few acres and they start out, and most of them fail. Farming is very hard, but a few of them have succeeded and moved on to acquire farms of their own, which is really important. And I do think in many ways, the future of farming here on the East End is probably going to be a lot of new farmers, not just old farmers. Even Lyle Wells, we describe him as a 11th generation farmer, but his father gave up farming. His father and his father's brother, and they were not farming when Lyle was born. And so Lyle actually got himself back into farming. And so in a way, he was a new farmer, not a legacy farmer. He didn't take over an operating farm. But I think people coming in and trying farming, starting new things, trying new creative crops is going to be really important here. As you can see, most of the farmers are farming now because they love it. It has to be in some way, it's a passion.
One of the things that impressed me when we were doing the film was the passion that Richard just mentioned. The young members of most of the families that I interviewed couldn't wait to finish their time at Cornell and get back here and get back to work on the farm. So it was encouraging to see the young people enthusiastic about farming.
Of course, there's a lot of young people, sons of farmers, who couldn't wait to get off the farm too.
Right.
That's always been part of the story.
Yeah, the goal of a farmer was to finish his days in a nice house in town, away from the farm.
Okay, Joan asked the question, what is your feeling about converting farmland to solar farms? Does the fertilizer used adversely affect the aquifer? There have been claims that the fertilizer and other chemicals used has resulted in the higher incidence of breast cancer on Long Island. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me go to the fertilizer question first, because the county health department has made a lot of noise about and caused a lot of problems for farmers about the use of nitrogen. But what I've been noticing, of course, is as more and more houses replace farms, the nitrogen loading in the various the Peconic Bay system and the Southside Bay system has gotten worse, not better. So I take some issue with that.
We could probably do more to improve water quality by banning lawn fertilizer than by restricting farmers' use of fertilizer.
That's very accurate, because farmers, you know, it is a business. So they're not going to put on any more fertilizer than they need. But you look at what people put on their lawns, which are totally useless, and it's a huge problem. I'm sorry, there was a first part to that question too. I missed that.
Yeah. What is your feeling about converting farmland to solar farms?
I'm not really in favor of converting farmland to solar farms. Here in Riverhead, no land that is zoned for farming can have solar panels put on it, except, of course, farmers can put panels to run their own operations, but that's all. It's not agriculture.
One of the problems with the farmland preservation is kind of related to this solar issue. And one of the things that apparently happens has happened relatively frequently in Southampton is people will go in with a lot of money, buy 10 acres of ground, put up their house, then dedicate, sell off the development rights on 8 acres and put a horse on a barn and a horse on the 8 acres and say they have a farm. And the whole point of farmland preservation was to preserve active farming, farmland that was growing crops, not, you know, stables and things like that.
fact, that's one of the big challenges now for the Peconic Land Trust. And they've been putting what are known as overlay easements on top of the regular conservation easement. And these have a positive requirement that the land be used for growing food crops or things of that kind. This is a new movement, and it's just starting, but I think it's something that we're going to have to look at a lot in the future, especially on the South Fork.
Yeah, that was when I was making the film, I was talking to John Halsey, and that fake farm horse thing was a pet peeve of his.
Still is.
Still is.
Okay, this might be for you, Glenn. How did you select the farmers interviewed? There are larger farms in Nassau than the Grossman farm in Malvern.
I think I have to step in on that, Glenn.
Glenn,
It was
you're muted.
it was my job to pick the farmers. And while I recognized that there were, bigger farms and different farms, I had to get a cross-section, a representation, and I tried to do that.
Okay, Michelle asks, we might have answered this for the most part. How do the farmers feel about the use of pesticides and pollution in the bay?
One of the things that impressed me when I would spend an entire day with one of the farmers that has potential for the film. And it was not uncommon for the question of pesticides to come up. And my overall impression was that they were very cautious and very cognizant, for example, of pest populations and things like that, and were reluctant to just, say it's Tuesday and let's spray something. They were very carefully monitoring pest populations in their fields before they considered using pesticides. So that impressed me. Now, whether that was a skewed sample, I don't know, but it was something that I saw consistently.
I don't think that was skewed, Frank. Integrated pest management, as it's called, has become the mantra of most farmers, and they're not going to spray anything unless they absolutely have to. And there are a number of newer pesticides that are very low impact. For instance, one favorite thing for farmers to use now to help control the cabbage worm, which is a serious pest of anything in that family, like broccoli and cauliflower. Customers do not like finding little green worms in their head of broccoli when they buy it at a farm stand. But there is actually a virus that's packaged and called BT for short, that they can spray that only affects those worms and nothing else. And so it's things like that that are being used quite a lot, and then they're even certified for organic farmers to use.
One of the things that we didn't get into, but we talked about. Oh geez, I just lost his name. The photographer. Who am I talking about, Dick?
You're talking about Mario?
The experimental farms. Fullerton, Hal Fullerton.
Oh.
Hal Fullerton had a program where he would grow these vegetables on his farm and then package them up and send them off on the railroad to his customers. And the last thing that he did was to ensure that there were no bugs on it, he gave it a spray of arsenic. So there was a very curious flavor on some of his vegetables when they got to their ultimate destination. And this was, turn of the 20th century.
Right. Well, arsenic became a popular fertilizer here in the form of Paris green
Right.
in the 1870s uh, when the Colorado potato beetle arrived on Long Island. Not from Colorado, by the way, but and the only thing that it could use to control it was Paris green, which is basically a copper arsenate, and was used extensively on farms, both as a to control the potato beetle and also to kill the potato plants off in order to harvest them at the end, right into the 1940s.
Okay, Bunny asked a question. I get the feeling that there are only a few East End farms that supply our local farm stands in the Three Village area. Out of curiosity, which are they? You know, Richard, by chance?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Oh.
I'm not familiar with the farm stands in the Three Village area, but the way most farmers who operate farm stands, it's almost impossible for them to grow everything all the time and have it in peak season. And so there's what they call the yard trade, and they all trade vegetables around amongst them. And there's quite a large network of farmers that participate in that. And if one farmer happens to have corn that's its peak in a particular time, and another farmer happens to have lettuce, they'll trade back and forth. So Schmidt's farm can sell corn, and even though he may not grow it on his farm. So there's a lot of trading back and forth, and it's all local produce, but that's what keeps all of the farm stands stocked. There's only a couple of farm stands that I know of that sell only things that they produce themselves.
I think maybe Bunny might be, Bunny, I don't know if you're on, if you want to unmute, but maybe at the farmers markets that are local, it seems to be the same farms that come to them.
That was exactly it. I got the feeling that there was only one or two suppliers that came into our area. And no matter which farm, my point was, no matter which farm stand you went to, you got food from the same supplier. That was what I was referring to. That's all.
Okay.
I guess those are the ones that are participating in the farmers markets.
Yeah.
Farmers markets are a difficult thing because it takes a lot of time for a farmer to have to go to the market and sell his produce there. I know my brother tried that a couple of times and decided it just didn't make any sense to him. He'd much rather have the customers come to him. So it's a fairly limited number of farmers and that are going to show up at anything like that.
We got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to follow the truck down to Queens, so yeah, I know about that.
There's a shot in the film of Fred Terry's truck going by, and we were at the rest stop on the expressway. And then Mario and I jumped in the van, and I had the pedal to the floor, and I didn't catch the Fred Terry until we got to the Kosciuszko Bridge. But it was a fortunately, it was early in the morning and there was very little police traffic out.
Okay, what impact has the increasing demand for organic produce having on the farms on Long Island?
Could you say that again?
What impact has the increasing demand for organic produce have on the farms on Long Island?
It's been another important variant in farming. My brother's farm, for instance, is all organic now because people want organic milk and they want organic eggs. And so, that's the way they're going to meet demand from customers. It's also been a profitable niche for some farmers because often you can sell organic produce for a little bit more because it's worth a little bit more. So
Any
that's
idea
important.
of CSA versus farm stand sales?
But a friend,
While you're
I'm
thinking,
full of
Fred,
Fred.
I know a
I-
couple of CSA operators, and yeah, again, it's a specialized niche. You have to have the distribution network. You have to have trucks that can go, and so it's for a small number of farms. It's worked very well.
Mhm.
The one of the stories that I was told was out in Orient, Fred Terry's favorite competitor are the Lathams in the Latham farm stand, right as you come into Orient. And the story goes is that Eddie Latham's daughter was in college, and she decided to set up a farm stand to get spending money, and because they didn't have a farm stand. And so she ran this farm stand with produce from their home farm out in Orient. And then when she graduated from college, her father took it over and discovered that she was making almost a third of what he was making on the farm. So he got very heavily into the farm stand business.
Smart kid. Does the orchid grower in Riverhead sell to the public or only wholesale? If so, what is the name of it?
It's Bianchi, and they're only wholesale. But if you buy orchids from florists around here, chances are it's going to be grown in the Bianchi greenhouses.
They've been in the business 100 years or more.
Right. Although only briefly, only the last decade or two in Riverhead.
Yeah, they used to be in Bellport.
Okay, Rick asks a question. Do you feel that with the dollar value of land that it's perhaps inevitable that more farmers will bow to development pressures and sell?
It seems inevitable, but what has been happening lately is a lot of those farmers are, of course, selling their development rights. The land preservation effort has really been quite successful. But and in the last decade and a half, the bottom, of course, fell out of the real estate market, and I think that was helpful for farmers too. So very few farms here have been converted from farms to houses in the last 20 years, surprisingly. I'm fairly confident with the tools in place that we've already preserved half of the farmland in this town of Riverhead. And I think we have tools in place probably to preserve at least 3/4 of the rest of it.
Okay,
And that keeps the price somewhat affordable. What's happening now, and Frank alluded to this, is as people on the South Fork buy land to grow horses on or things like that, even preserved farmland is becoming too expensive. Preserved farmland on the South Fork can sell for $100,000 an acre. Here on the North Fork, it can sell for $25,000 or $30,000 an acre. And do the math, you have to grow an awful lot of produce to pay for land even at those prices. So even preserved farmland is becoming problematic.
Okay, Cynthia asks, is there any movement toward regenerative farming techniques and even no-till, getting away from fossil fuel-based fertilizer, et cetera?
I have a personal hay field on our property here in Jamesport, about 10 acres that we're growing hay for my nephew's dairy herd. And we replanted it twice in the last 3 years with no-till grain drill. So there's part of the answer.
Okay. Bunny said, Frank, when I was fortunate to participate in an archaeological dig at the Terry Mulford house with you, you hypothesized that originally the North Fork was used as a source of white oak for the massive British merchant ships. Could you discuss the very early history of farming on the East End?
Oh, wow.
Go for it, Frank.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting is that Long Island was known for its corn. The principal crop out on the East End was corn, but one of the things that was one of the foods that was being consumed in large quantities was cabbage. And the reason that they were producing cabbage is it has a pretty good storage life. So the idea early on was just grow as much corn as you could, and it was used in a diversity, in diverse ways.
Corn was the main crop here right through the beginning of the 20th century, I think. But if you go back, the question is really about the 17th and 18th centuries. And most farms were basically subsistence in that time period. They mostly ate what they grew and grew what they ate, with maybe a little bit of extra off into the market. And that corn grew well here. Wheat didn't grow terribly well. So corn was one of the things that could be sold as a cash crop.
Okay. Joan asks, is the increasing deer population a problem for farmers?
Horrible problem, horrible problem. As you drive around here in the East End, you'll notice that most farmland that's growing anything edible has to be fenced in now. So it's an immense problem.
Yeah.
I know of a farm on the East End that maybe 20 years ago got a nuisance permit to cull the deer on his farm, hired 2 hunters, and in the course of 1 year, they took 200 deer off his farm.
Okay, Laura asks, wouldn't you prefer farms and stables which provide valuable outdoor recreation for residents and lots of jobs to another condo complex to housing development?
I think many of us prefer that. The question is, once you start getting a lot of recreational things like horse farming and so forth, one of the reasons for preserving agriculture is to preserve food, and that doesn't do that. So it's a mixed in my mind.
Dennis asks, what about Lewin's farm in Calverton? I don't really know what the question is. Dennis, are you on? But he said, what about Lewin's farm in Calverton?
Yes, I'm on. The question is really, when you talked about farmers sharing crops and selling them in a central place, is that what Lewin's farm does, or do they sell mainly what they grow, or do they sell stuff that they import from other places?
I don't know much about Lewin directly. Of course, they are big producers. So my guess is they probably sell most of what they grow, most of what they sell, but it wouldn't surprise me if they reach out to other surrounding farmers for some things.
Thank you.
Okay. What percentage of crop sales is the flower market?
Oh God, the flower market has to be more than half. Well, more than half. One of the things that's facilitated the floral, the whole flower industry is tissue culture. And so several of the big producers will grow genetically identical flats of maybe 500 poinsettias or whatever decorative flower, and then another operator will buy that and grow it out to commercial size. But the advent of tissue culture giving the opportunity to produce genetically identical kinds of crops is just amazing.
It's a big advance. As a teenager, I worked one summer for a local greenhouse operator, and to grow poinsettias at that point, what we had to do is we'd start with a cutting from the previous year, stick it in the ground. When it got big enough, you could cut pieces off of it. You cut those off and started those. And then when they got big enough, you cut those off and started the others. And the last ones, of course, became the single flower ones. The middle ones became the 3 flower ones. And the first ones became the 10 flower plants. But when you say flower production, I know of very little cut flower production here in the East End. There are a few, the Hestons and Peconic and Nutjog, for instance, is selling hydrangeas and things like that. But it's mostly potted plants, chrysanthemums in the fall, poinsettias in the winter, and it's almost all under, awful lot of it's under glass. And it's been a huge economic contributor.
I was talking to one of the farmers that eventually participated in the, well, he didn't participate in the film, he almost did. But his comment was that in May and June, he'll have a customer come in and spend $2,000 or $3,000 on decorative plants for putting out around his house, and then come back in July and complain that his corn costs a nickel more than the guy down the road.
I've heard things like that a lot. One thing we should say, add just to bring this up to date, the pandemic has had a major impact on agriculture. And one of the impacts, of course, has been that everybody has become gardeners. And so all of the local producers that produce plants, nursery stock and chrysanthemums and tomato plants and all kinds of things like this, were just wiped out this spring by customers. Everything they could grow, they sold. And it's been the same for farmers who were selling at retail. Certainly my brother has been inundated with customers. So the pandemic has been very good for farmers that were selling direct retail, and certainly selling anything that people could plant in the ground. For farmers that were growing wholesale stuff, it's just the opposite.
I experienced that, Richard. I went out looking for some plants for the spring and I couldn't find.
Right.
I was looking for it, was gone.
It looks like we have to revise this film, raise some more money, and do this new film about what's going on today.
Exactly.
That would be great.
Yeah.
How do you feel about owners of new housing near farms who then complain about excessive dust?
I've had it happen. Not so much about dust here, but about noise from our irrigation well. And had people come over, for the person who bought a house next door. I mean, our irrigation well has been here since 1950. He built a house in the 1980s and then complained because we were running the irrigation motor.
The town of Southold has published a Farmer's Bill of Rights. And essentially what happens is it alerts potential homeowners to the fact that they're moving into an agricultural area and there are certain inconveniences which they may experience as a result of that. But the farmers were there first. So, you know, grin and bear it.
Yes, Riverhead has right to farm laws too. And the farm owners have enough sway in town hall to keep those enforced.
Good. We have Nicole on, Mario. I think she's from California. She's one of your guests. And she asks, what do your panelists think about the urban city farmer and community gardens?
I think it's a great idea that people are growing things on their rooftops and in their patios. It's hard to imagine that it can make a serious dent in the food supply any place because there's just not enough acreage or rooftops. But I think it's a great movement.
Yeah, there's pretty fair amount of community gardening in New York City, in Brooklyn, Queens, even in Manhattan, there are, and the Bronx, there are community garden plots where people come in and grow produce for their own consumption.
We have community gardens out here too. The Halligan Museum has a community garden, for instance.
Yeah, and
Land Trust has one in Southold.
The AME Church here in Setauket has the Hobbs Farm down in Center Reach.
Yep.
And it's a community garden.
There's a lot of those. She also asked, what impact does urban farming have on food insecurities and food deserts in the US?
I'm not really an expert on that, but I can't believe it may help a little bit, but just the ratio of land in cities that can be farmed to the ratio of people there means it's going to be pretty infinitesimal.
Nicole,
By
do you
the
want
way,
to answer?
yeah, Nicole runs the OLLI over at Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. She's the head running the OLLI program there.
Is she on? Nicole, do you want to ask another question? Did you want to elaborate?
Yes,
at all?
yes, I would like to. Thank you very much. So
Hi there.
part of the farming, I was a board of directors on the Harbors area farmers markets here in California, where we ran 5 farmers markets. So I'm familiar with dealing with local farmers. And this was prior to Michelle Obama coming into office, where urban farming and food table from crop to table became highlighted. One of the things I'm really excited about is at at Cal State Dominguez, we have an urban farm, and Mario might be able to help me a little bit more on this, where they wanted to make use of the land that was just being not utilized. So they are trying to, they do food giveaways, and all of the products that are grown from the farm on campus are given to the students. And they're also, we give them to, at the time post-COVID, we were giving them to the university housing and to doing food demonstrations, because we know at CSU and the CSU system in California, the number of students with food insecurities and housing insecurities is high. And that's part of our intergenerational program here at Dominguez, making sure that that our OLLI students were able to work directly with the students. And one of the things I was really surprised about, which a lot of people don't know what to do with their foods once they receive them. And that's something else that we did at the Harbors Areas Farmers Market. We started doing food demonstrations, how to grow and use the crop that you purchased. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Richard and Frank, are there any, I mean, I'm sure there's a million programs, but are there any programs that are benefiting the, with the farmers and the, on Long Island, the farmers and the lower income? I know of one called Heartbeat Farms, where all of their produce that they grow goes into to provide for less fortunate families, but I'm sure there's other programs.
Certainly a number of farmers here that operate farm stands and things like that. You always end up with extra produce because you can't time when it grows with when your customers are going to show up. And so a lot of that is donated to like Cast in South Old Town and other food pantry kinds of things, which is great.
Okay, somebody asked, what is tissue culture?
Tissue culture is, for example, you could go into a carrot, okay? And in the center of the carrot is a yellow part, okay? And if you take a sterile instrument, you can scoop out that center of the carrot, put it on spread it out and put it on a culture medium, and then grow thousands of carrots from that one scoop of tissue. So you're taking a sample of tissue from the plant and then replicating it. And there are some plants, like particularly poinsettias and begonias, lend themselves to this tissue culture procedure.
Yeah, the example I gave before, maybe one cutting of a poinsettia could make maybe 10 plants in the course of a season. With tissue culture, you could make tens of thousands.
Exactly, exactly.
Is that how they make the hybrid? Is that how they make the hybrid tomatoes and things like that? They take the tissues from different tomatoes to create a different variety?
No, that's a breeding process where you take pollen from one and fertilize the flower of another variety. The classic is a Burpee Big Boy, which is a a first generation cross. And it's strictly a genetic inheritance situation. The problem is that some people will get this nice, great big, juicy tomato, save the seeds, plant it, and what they're going to get, they're not going to get the same tomato, they're going to get the parent varieties. So there are some certain plants that are strictly genetic hybrids.
Okay, we have two more questions and then I think we'll be finished. What's the difference between farms growing decorative flowers, which sounds acceptable, and horse farms, which sounds unacceptable? Neither produce edible crops for people, at least.
New York State Ag and Markets regulates farming in the state, has a definition of agriculture. And agriculture, if you're selling produce, basically, you have to be marketing it. And so a horse farm is acceptable as agriculture if they're growing horses, if they're selling, breeding horses and selling them. But if it's somebody with a couple of pet horses out on in the side yard, that's not considered agriculture. So that's one way of defining it. It has to be for production. And they put a dollar value on that.
Okay. Joan asks, how do you propagate seedless fruits such as watermelon?
Cuttings. You take cuttings, or you can do it by tissue culture. Classically, seedless grapes are just done by taking cuttings and rooting them and continuing them, or grafting onto other rootstocks. All of the grapes on Long Island are grafted. All of the grapes around the world, probably the wine grapes, are all grafted.
And it's the same for all apple trees and peach trees and pear trees and a lot of other kinds of fruits.
If you go into the some of the horticultural catalogs, you can buy one tree that has 4 or 5 different kinds of fruit on it because of the different branches that have been grafted on.
Wow. Well, I think that's all we have. Any last minute questions? If anybody wants to ask a last minute question, just raise their hand real quick. But this was wonderful. Thank you. Glenn, do you have any?
No, I thank everybody for coming, and especially the panelists for spending an hour and a half here. And
yes, thank you.
Mario and I have deferred to Richard and Frank because they know more than we do about the issues. So thanks a lot for answering all those questions.
Roger just raised his hand. If we can just give him a chance to ask his question real quick. Roger?
Yes, I just want to make a comment. I've been on Long Island my whole life, and I'm 83 now. And I've learned more today about Long Island farms than I ever knew before. It's a fantastic program you've put on, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure many of my friends feel the same way.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
And I think we should be thanking Glenn for bringing us this movie too. It's certainly something that was much needed. Even though it's almost 20 years old now, it still really tells the story about farming on Long Island and how important farming is to our culture and our communities.
Yes, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Mario, Frank, and Richard. Really, this was wonderful. Very interesting. Thank you. And I think everyone appreciates it. Thank you so much for being here and for answering these questions.
I would encourage everybody to go visit the Halleckville Farm Museum. It's very interesting. Wander through the houses and see the fields, and they have animals. So it's
how is that spelled?
Halleckville.
HALLOCKVILLE. And it's in the town of Riverhead.
That's in Riverhead.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Go to the website halleckville.org.
Got it. All right.
And Richard, I want to find out your brother's. I want to find out the name of your brother's farm. I'll send you an email.
Okay.
So thank you all. And thank you all for joining us.